Let's get started. Heavenly Father, we just thank you for this time to kind of wrap up our study on these plagues. Looking at 8 and 9 tonight, and I pray that you would help us to learn something new like we do every week. And just thank you for the opportunity. In your name, I pray, amen. Okay, so you it's been a couple of weeks since we talked about stuff. So if you remember where we were, we had to go without decent water for a while, at least a week, maybe longer. And then we had all those frogs come after us. And then we got annoyed with gnats or lice, something of that nature. And then we had a transition to a fourth plague that seemed to be a little bit more, that affected us a little bit more because we were either getting stung or bit or something by some kind of insects. And so whatever the swarm was, then we lost a pretty large portion of our livestock. And then festering boils broke out all over all of us and just kept us inside. And then the kind of where we left off was we just survived the worst hailstorm we've ever seen. So we know that it's never been like anything we've recorded in our Egyptian murals since, and we're told by the Bible that nothing's happened since then that's quite that intense either. So what we find is at the end of this seventh plague, everything that had not been brought inside and protected, so anything that was out in the field, ended up dying from that hailstorm, both the thunder and the hail. Just to kind of remind where we were, been doing this each time. So this is a major portion of the gods that the different Egyptian cultures would have, or cities would have been worshiping and expecting to take care of them. And we've got these blue X's that show us those that are supposed to have protected us and supposed to have done something about the things that have happened to us. And so far, they've been completely powerless. They have not been able to deal with it. And of course, what we'll be doing is working our way through a few more tonight, although there's several that we'll actually have to wait until we come back and dig into the 10th. So we find ourselves in chapter 10. We're starting in chapter 10. And what we see, and it's interesting that we've just come out of plague 7, which remember is the first of the second or third set of 3. And God takes a moment to remind us what's going on. And so we see him starting in verse 1, and the Lord says to Moses, "Go into Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart and the heart of his servants, that I may show these signs of mine among them, and that you may tell in the hearing of your son and your grandson." So the next generations are supposed to hear how God dealt harshly with the Egyptians and what signs he has done among them. And of course, the purpose is what? That you may know that I am the Lord. So he's been saying this to Pharaoh the whole time, that I'm going to send hail tomorrow at this time, and by this you're going to know that I am Lord. And here's the reminder that it is not just for the Egyptians, but also for the Israelites. The Hebrews are supposed to be watching and observing what's going on, and most importantly, passing it along to the future generations. So it's not an accident that we won't necessarily go there tonight because we've got a lot covered, but there's several times where these events actually come into play in other places. So specifically, we see them when Moses is talking to the generation right after this one. We see them when Joshua, just after they have conquered Canaan, he talks about these episodes again. We see David in the Psalms refer to these wonders several times. So these become a very important piece of the process by which we know that God is the Lord. And honestly, I think as we've been going through Revelation on Sunday mornings, we are reminded of that same thing by those same types of events when it comes to those seals and bowls and stuff and the trumpets. All right, so let's pick up with the 8th plague. And these next two are going to be pretty significant. So Moses and Aaron go into Pharaoh and say to him, "Thus says the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, how long are you going to refuse to humble yourself before me?" So notice the accusations change a little bit. It's not how long are you going to disobey me and keep those people and not let them go. It's now you're being obstinate, and how long are you going to refuse to humble yourself? You need to let my people go that they may serve me. For if you refuse to let them go, behold, tomorrow I'm going to bring locusts into your country, and they will cover the face of the land so that no one can see the land. They shall eat what is left to you after the hail, and they shall eat every tree of yours that grows in the field, and they shall fill your houses and the houses of all your servants, of all the Egyptians. Neither your fathers nor your grandfathers have seen from the day they came on earth to this day. And he turned and went out from Pharaoh. So as you recall, back in the end of the hailstorm, we saw that when Moses goes in to visit Pharaoh again, in chapter 9, verse 31, we saw that the flax and barley were struck down, so those were gone, but the wheat and the emmer were still healthy because they hadn't come up yet. And so the assumption here is that perhaps, because Moses mentions it, those two crops are giving Pharaoh some comfort that all is not lost. And so we see here that God is saying that, those crops that you take some comfort in, well, guess what? They're about to be gone too. And then here we get an interesting conversation between Pharaoh and his servants, where they say, "How long are you going to let this man be a snare to us? You need to let these men go that they may serve the Lord. And do you not yet understand that Egypt is ruined?" Okay, so they're starting to get it. We've had most of the livestock wiped out. A good portion of the livestock that was left have now been wiped out. A lot of the crops have been wiped out by the hail. And now Moses has just told us that what we have left is going to definitely be coming. Those locusts are coming after it. So basically what they're saying is Moses definitely has the upper hand here. He's getting the better of us. How long are you going to let him be a snare to us? So what they're kind of accusing him of is that he's baiting Pharaoh. He knows Pharaoh's personality, his mentality, and Moses is essentially playing with him at this point in Pharaoh's servant's mind. You need to let them go so that they may, or how long are they going to be a snare to us? Basically, how long are you going to let him keep pounding on us? Let those people go that they may serve the Lord their God. The land is ruined, which means we don't have much left. And every time you refuse, what happens? It gets worse. I lose more. Okay? So if you continue down this path that you've been thinking about or that you've been doing, then we could actually lose everything. And all I'm going to say is it's not worth it. It's time to let them go. So and it does appear that they got through to Pharaoh, because we see in verse 9, verse 8, that Moses and Aaron are brought back. This is the first time that's happened. And Pharaoh says to them, "Go serve the Lord your God, but which ones are to go?" So he's trying to kind of clarify some things. And they're basically saying, he's kind of trying to take that parental role almost, like, okay, you can go, but who's going to be there and where are you going to be and how long are you going to be there? And Moses reminds him that we will go with our young and our old, our sons and our daughters, and our flocks and herds, because we are going to hold a feast to the Lord. And then Pharaoh said to him, the Lord be with you, if ever I were to let you and your little ones go. Look, you have some evil purpose in mind. No. The men among you may go, and you may serve the Lord, because that is what you were asking. Of course, that's not what Moses has said at all the whole time. And they were driven out of Pharaoh's presence. So at this point, I guess the guards or whatever that would be standing around probably are ushering Moses and Aaron out of Pharaoh's throne room there. Basically, it's kind of get these guys out of my sight before I lose. So he's getting angry. He's accusing Moses of essentially making an unreasonable request. What's interesting, too, is that, as we'll find out later when we get to Mount Sinai, and especially when we get to Leviticus and start to look at the mechanism by which the sacrificial system is going to set up, who is it that actually does all the interactions with the tabernacle? Well, it's going to be Aaron as high priest and his sons and so on, but the people come there. But who is it that comes? Who is it that's supposed to bring the bull or the two pigeons or the head of the house, who is the men, the lead man of the family? That's interesting because that's exactly what Pharaoh's like telling them they can do, but at this point, that's not what God's asked for. Okay. So basically what he's saying, Moses has told him, is that God told us to go out in the wilderness and have this festival and worship him. And in so doing, we need all of us. We're not going to leave our kids out of that. And we need our animals there. Okay. Remember, they'd had that discussion before about the animals. Yeah. Like when Pharaoh said, why don't you do it close by? And they said, well, no, we've got to do this a little bit further out because it might offend some of your people. So they get kicked out. It's clear that Pharaoh still believes he's in charge here. And notice that once he gets outside, the Lord says to Moses, verse 12, stretch out your hand over the land of Egypt for the locusts, so that they may come upon the land of Egypt and eat every plant of the land, all that the hail had left. So Moses stretches out his staff over the land of Egypt, and the Lord brought an east wind upon the land all that day and all that night. When it was morning, the east wind had brought the locusts. All right, so if we look at, this is what that area looks like. So the way the Bible describes things is the opposite of the way we kind of think about things here in our Western culture. So an eastern wind we think is what? Is going east. Yeah. So we would be thinking that it's kind of going this direction. And it could have. I mean, there's probably desert locusts in this area, of course, as well. It could be collected. But an east wind in this case is going to come from this way and going to be picking up locusts from this area and drive them into Egypt. And so this east wind blows all night or all the rest of the day. So it's probably a morning conversation. And then all that day, stiff breeze from the east, which was probably unusual. And then it lasts all through the night. And then we see that morning, when it was morning, the east wind had brought the locusts. The locusts came up over the land and settled on the whole country of Egypt, such a dense swarm of locusts as had never been seen before, nor ever will be again. They covered the face of the whole land, so the land was darkened, and they ate all the plants of the land, all the fruit of the trees that the hail had left. Not a single green thing remained, neither tree nor plant, through all the land of Egypt. So these locusts were not unknown here's a couple of images of locusts in the artwork that we've been seeing. So you kind of see one as part of a just a group of animals and stuff that would have been recorded. But here you can kind of see, well, there's some frogs, but some locusts on the plant. So this is not something that would be unusual for them, and certainly would be something that they would have in this area of the world. But what this particular incident exposes them to was definitely a lot more than they had ever seen, as the scripture says.
They almost look like grasshoppers.
Yeah, very much like that. All right, so let's see if video here. David Attenborough was actually there when it all happened. It's recorded. Maybe. But it's not playing here, so I'm gonna go.
I'm glad you know what it is.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
I would
Not
not.
me.
If we were having technical difficulties, we just have to punt.
That's perfectly okay. I think I'll look at the white or the black.
Can you imagine whatever you
Ooh, anybody bring popcorn?
Yeah.
Well, not working.
And junior mints. Steve has to always have junior mints when we go. Always go to the dollar store and buy the junior mints. and put
That's
them in my
smart.
purse.
Yes, that's very smart. What are they, like $6, $7?
Oh, yeah, it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Ah, there it is.
Oh, we got it.
Hey,
Look like bird.
It does look like birds.
It's volume.
Yeah, see, they look like grasshoppers. I never guess I never thought about what locusts look like. Either me looking creatures.
up close and personal.
You wouldn't want to go outside.
Mm-mm.
I mean, we get swarms of grasshoppers. in different
Oh,
countries.
like, I'm not seeing that big a swarm though. Have you? Have you all had them like that before?
No, I'm not thinking that.
I've never personally seen it, but I've seen videos of them.
Well, I mean, they had to have made this somewhere. So,
It still happens.
right, this had to have happened somewhere.
Not to the extent it did for Egypt.
I can't imagine there being many more than that. Can you? Than what's right there on the screen.
Not so much.
I think you wanted us to hear it so we could get the full effect of how it sounded
Sound
too,
would
because that
be-
would have been,
A buzzing, I would guess.
and you'd feel like overwhelmed by that piece of it as well.
Well, apparently Pharaoh was,
Yeah, but not enough, huh?
but not enough. He was temporary sin against the Lord. I love when, please forgive me for my sins only this once.
Only this once.
That's my translation there, verse 17.
It's funny because I'd like to think I wouldn't act like this, but think I have at some point.
I think he's, unplugged. Oh, there it comes. Okay.
There is no other species on the planet that responds as quickly and as dramatically at times as the desert locust. Apes that have remained in the ground for 20 years begin to hatch. The young locusts are known as fockers, for at this stage they are flighters. They find new feeding grounds by following the smell of sprouting grass. Normally, it takes 4 weeks for hoppers to become adults. When the conditions are right, as now, their development switches to the fast track. As the vegetation in one place begins to run out, the winged adults release pheromones, scent messages, which tell others in the group that they must move on.
Humans don't seem to be bothered by it.
The oldest of the group.
So that for them.
And when groups merge, they form a swarm. An adult locust eats its entire body weight every day. The whole swarm can consume literally hundreds of tons of vegetation. They have to keep on moving. The swarm travels with the wind. It's the most energy-saving way of flying. Following the flow of wind means that they're always heading toward areas of low pressure, places where wind meets rain and vegetation starts to grow. As they fly, swarms join up with other swarms to form gigantic plagues several billion strong and as much as 40 miles wide. They consume every edible thing that lies in their path. This is one of planet Earth's greatest spectacles. It's rare to see from this scale, and it won't last long. Once the food is gone, the steady roar of a billion beating locust wings will once again be replaced by nothing more than the sound of the desert.
Well, that was interesting.
apparently there was a storm that came in 2020 in Kenya and Ethiopia, kind of
That was it.
south.
Then in Ethiopia,
And with that and COVID at the same time, it really just kind of wiped out those four countries. So coming down these areas here, you see Ethiopia there and stuff below it. What was interesting was in that description, you'll notice that they came from the east and they catch the wind and they drift with the wind and basically will go wherever the wind takes them. So it's interesting that who was in charge of the wind this time? God had this wind blowing and it blew them exactly where he wanted them. And so they collected there. And we see that I think I was watching another news article about that particular plague, and they said that a plague like this, and obviously we think what Moses brought was probably worse than what we just looked at, but Attenborough there said there's billions in that swarm, that plague, and said that they eat as much as the state of New York and the state of California in one day. So that's a lot of food. And so it did not take them long to come to those green areas along the river there, because remember, most of the green stuff in Egypt is spread along that corridor there, so it did not take them long to wipe it out. And so we see that as the locusts finish up, they covered the face of the land. We saw that. The land was darkened. They ate all the plants and the fruit. Not a green thing remained, neither tree nor plant of the field. And notice in 16 was Pharaoh do. Then Pharaoh hastily or quickly calls Moses and Aaron and said, I have sinned against the Lord. We've heard him say this before. I have sinned against the Lord and against you. Although here it gets interesting. It's verse 17. Now therefore forgive my sin, please, only this once.
oh, that, only this one.
And plead with the Lord your God only to remove this death for
Only
me.
to-
So very clearly, the locusts have taken their toll. So Moses went out from Pharaoh, pleads with the Lord. The Lord turns the wind into a very strong west wind. And this is where we can understand how the Bible describes this, or how Moses is describing this to us. Because we get a strong west wind, which then drives those locusts into the Red Sea, which of course is the opposite side. So over here, so it would have picked them up and driven them towards the right-hand side of the map into the Red Sea. Not a single locust was left in all the country of Egypt. But the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he did not let the people go. So the it's interesting here that that Moses or Pharaoh does respond, but yet at the same time his attitudes have not really changed, and he still is considering himself essentially an equal with the folks we've got going on here. All right. So some of the Egyptian gods we've actually already seen. So you remember this guy who was Osiris, who was the god of agriculture. We talked about him right there during the hailstorm. And what's interesting is that there is a how do they say it? Well, it just says his role was later absorbed into Osiris, so this guy's a little more ancient. This is a god named Nepri, who is specifically the god of grain. And interestingly enough, you want to guess which rains he's charged with protecting?
All the ones the locusts ate.
Well, the ones that were left over from the hail and that the locusts ate, exactly. The wheat, and the
He
Emmer
took care of it. He
are
got
the
the
two
other.
that are associated with this gap.
That's what he's got his hands on anyway.
Yep, and so, I'm not sure that was necessarily an accident. Set and Horus we've seen before. I would include them here simply because, they're supposed to be able to protect Pharaoh, but they're the sky and storm. And certainly as the wind blows from the desert and brings these locusts in, it would have been directly in their areas of control supposedly. And then, of course, our Nut and Shu, as the atmosphere and the god of the air and the heavens. I mean, notice what it says. Well, actually, we're gonna come back to her here in a second. She's gonna come up in the 9th plague as well. All right, so that Nepri is really the only new one, and I didn't add him to that family tree because he's really part of Osiris in these later years.
I didn't finish the 8th play. Writing it down. Went too fast.
Oh, this one up here. Okay. So 9th plague, we see some similarities like we've been looking for the pattern. Or as we looked at the pattern, we had 1st and 2nd, and then 3rd. And you remember the 1st and 2nd were kind of well described, kind of detailed what's happened and the interaction between Pharaoh and Moses. Then we get the 3rd,
Got it.
and then the 4th, the flies, we get quite a bit there. 5th plague, we get the livestock and the disease, and then immediately it goes into the 6th plague, the 3rd of the 2nd group. Very little information there. And so on the 9th one, we do get a little bit more detail than the 3rd and the 6th, but we don't get as much as we've been getting. And just like we saw for 3rd and 6th, there's no exchange between Moses and Pharaoh. So coming out of the 2nd, we went straight into the 3rd. Coming out of the 5th, we went straight into the 6th. And here in the going from the 8th to the 9th, we see the same thing. So Lord turns the west wind on the locusts are driven out, not a single locust was left in all the country of Egypt. But the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he did not let the people of Israel go. And notice in 21, we transition immediately into, then the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand toward heaven. That's what I was looking for a minute ago. Moses is about to strike heaven. And stretch out your hand toward heaven that there may be darkness over the land of Egypt, a darkness which can be felt. So Moses stretched out his hand toward heaven. There was pitch darkness in all the land of Egypt for 3 days. They couldn't see one another, nor did anyone rise from his place for 3 days. But the people of Israel had light where they lived. We're not sure if he's holding the staff here or not. Presumably he's got it with him, so he probably does, since he used it, or it was described as having used it for the locusts. So a couple of thoughts here. We're not sure what we can make of this phrase, a darkness to be felt. There are some scholars who like to try to make this a really intense sandstorm. And if you've ever been in a sandstorm or seen a sandstorm, then your visibility is next to nothing.
Or
Okay.
blizzard. White out.
Well, that's true, yeah. But I don't think that the
They have those
description here, I don't think the description here necessarily allows us to go that direction.
You know, I constantly in a cave when they turned the lights out and it was totally dark. And there was a heavy feeling.
Yeah.
I don't know how to describe it, but you did have a heaviness feeling.
Right.
So
So I think that's probably closer to what we're dealing with here, not a sandstorm that kind of gets
No.
into everything. And this, I think the description is clear that we're talking about pitch darkness. So even in a sandstorm, there'd still be some light. Even though you couldn't go in and out and about, it's clear here that Moses is making the distinction that they couldn't see each other. Nor did anybody rise from their place for 3 days. So basically, everything shuts down for this 3-day period. Other thing we don't know is all of the people of Israel had light where they lived. So we don't know if they had, like, daylight was still present there, or whether we're talking about something a little bit more specific where, for whatever reason, the Egyptians couldn't light torches and lamps and these kinds of things, whereas the Israelites could and would have had access to the light. Based on the limited description we get, we would have to say that it seems to be enough darkness to just have hit that whole area. And presumably, the Israelites, even though they had light where they lived, that could mean in their house they had lamps and stuff, or it could mean that in the land of Goshen, where they lived, they had light. So we just don't know. But we do know that the striking of the light here for 3 days is very significant, and very much would have had a significant impact on this community. If you think about it from an economic standpoint, psychological standpoint, emotional standpoint. And so just like the hailstorm didn't feel like it was going to let up, and I'm sure these locusts were just kind of on you the whole time, and even though it didn't take them long to wipe out everything, it was still probably seemed like a really long time to those folks. And then we go straight into this pitch darkness that lasts for these 3 days. So this did take a significant toll on the Egyptians. All right. So we get a response out of Pharaoh here. So Pharaoh calls Moses and says, "Go serve the Lord. I'll even let your little ones go with you. But I'm not going to let the livestock go. Let your flocks and your herds remain behind." So we're not exactly sure exactly what he was thinking here, but it's possible. So obviously we haven't seen anything change about his attitudes. He still thinks he's in a place of bargaining and negotiation, even though Moses is clearly the one in control here. He might be thinking that, what do the Egyptians have left at this point? Not much, right? Those fellows that actually took heed to Moses' warning and brought their animals in and have been protecting them, we have those. Chances are we bought some from the Israelites and probably paid a pretty penny for them. But he might be thinking that, one, I'm not going to let their livestock go or go with them, because if they're probably not going to leave their livestock. They'll come back for those. But even if they don't, what happens? We get them. Yeah, so they're ours. So
At
we
this point, they
see,
need them. They don't
Yeah.
have any.
and right. So it may not be a win-win situation for him, but at least there's something that he gets out of it. But we see Moses have the same response he had in the 8th plague. No, you must let us have sacrifices and burnt offerings. We've got to be able to take these animals with us. And notice how Moses puts it. God's the one that is asking us to take these animals with us. And so our livestock, this is verse 26, our livestock also must go with us. Not a hoof shall be left behind. For we must take of them to serve the Lord our God. But God's not going to tell us which ones he wants until we get there. So we got to take them all. Because when we arrive, then he will tell us. But the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he would not let them go. All right. And then we see, we'll come back to that in a second. So let's look at this one's pretty neat. This is the last of the plagues, well, the normal plagues. And here we start to hit some of the gods that have not been mentioned yet, but are pretty critical, some of the big heavy hitters. So this is one that you probably actually have heard of, because even today, he would be kind of one of the more famous Egyptian gods. Ra, or Amun-Ra, would be another name that goes by. And so you'll notice he's got a depiction with the falcon head, very similar to Horus. So Horus is going to, well, we have him, yeah. Remember, Horus is the son of Osiris, and as a sky god, he takes on some of Ra's roles. Actually, he would be great-great-grandson to Ra. So whenever we see him, we usually see the sun, and we see his solar boat. So this is what he rides across the sky. So during the night, he goes under. Remember the three-tiered universe that we looked at. So he goes across the dome and then under. And as he goes through the netherworld, he battles usually, I don't know if I put a, nope, there's one here. The chaos snake.
Yeah.
They battle him all night. And if they vanquished him, what happens? The sun rises again the next day. If he doesn't vanquish that snake, what do they think happens? The sun is not going to come back. So for all they know, Ra has been defeated. Now,
Because it's dark.
in this case, we're not following the normal progression of things. Moses has walked outside, flung his arm towards the heavens, and what happened? Lights went out. Okay? So presumably Ra's up there doing his thing and immediately has lost control. We see him depicted as the solar disk sometimes, and you'll see those two cobras there. Here's another version of that. And this brings in another couple of goddesses. These two cobras actually depict a pair of goddesses called the two ladies. This was a combination of two goddesses. One was from Upper Egypt, one was from Lower Egypt. So we talked about those before, and you can tell by the headdresses. Remember this one kind of, I can't remember which one's which, but one's the upper and one's the lower Egyptian headdress. And so these gals represent both. Here's another version, kind of shows a little bit better. And so these, when Egypt was unified, these became a pair of ladies or sisters. Let's see if I got one with the headdress on it. So the one on the left is Wadjet, and the one on the right so she's protector of Lower Egypt. You can see she's got that headdress with little antenna or whatever that comes out.
With imagination.
Nekhbet is the other gal. And it's interesting because as you look through the artwork, where in ancient depictions, there are the two snakes. we see Necbet kind of transition into Vulture. Okay, and sometimes you can see some of the goddesses. So there's one of the lioness goddesses that we talked about earlier. And here you can see Wadjet on one side and Necbet on the other. And so these,
Fascinating that they could draw those things.
Yeah.
like that.
so here would be Necbet, her vulture form.
Vulture, yeah.
Here's another version. They tend to go together.
Hmm.
And again, you can see the headdresses.
There.
Of course, does this remind you of a modern day symbol that we use? Moses is going to use something similar to this a little bit later in our story as we get into the wilderness.
Oh, the
Oh,
But-
the doctor,
the doctor.
Caduceus.
medical
Mhm.
physician,
So there's some who believe those two snakes
Okay.
yeah.
originate from the symbology of these two ladies.
Because they were the protector.
They were the protectors.
Right.
They have, so basically, they were protectors of Ra, and they also protected the other gods. You can kind of see that in that plate. So this is Sekhmet, I think, although we did have another lioness headed.
So why did the physicians use that?
Okay.
Protected.
Well, we think that, we remember also when the snakes were biting the Israelites, Moses took a snake and twined it around a stick, and whoever moved on it got healed.
Oh,
So
okay.
there's other symbolism
Interesting.
that kind of also
I
goes,
don't know the significance of what
Mhm.
they
yeah.
look at.
So that symbol that Moses was using would have,
And of course,
Pretty
these
similar
right
to-
sides of don't worship snakes. too.
yeah. We track this a little bit further. So these were protectors of Ra and other gods, so that's pretty important. So we've got Ra getting hit, and these two ladies getting hit. The other reason that these were getting hit is because they tend to be associated with the Eye of Ra. We talked about that earlier. And so the Eye of Ra is here, and that's the right eye. And so here you can see artistic vision of that. You see Wadjet here and Necbet. And then also related, this would be the eye of Horus that came later. So Horus's eye is always the left eye, and Eye of Ra is always the right eye. But when they were a story that is associated with the kind of the first depiction of the Eye of Ra, and the Eye of Ra is a feminine aspect. And the story where this started was Ra was getting old, and people were making fun of him, and like his subjects and stuff. And so he sent the Eye of Ra out to find out who was making fun of him. And so not only does it go out and look to see who's being bad, but it also, they have the ability to exact retribution. Okay, so generally the Eye of Ra is kind of given in a negative sense by letting subjects know, letting Pharaoh know that his subjects were being disrespectful. But in just the normal way of things, they should be looking out for Pharaoh. Okay, but we don't know which Pharaoh this is, but here you can definitely see the two ladies again. As you can kind of tell there between their headdresses. They would also provide vision and foresight. Okay. So very often you would see these incorporated into some of the decorations that the pharaohs would wear. So here you would see kind of snakes that come down and would protect your face. And then you also see the vulture's head and the cobra head on the front. Okay, so where you look out, what's right there? Those two goddesses are guiding your vision so that you can see what's coming and presumably you can then protect the people from what's coming. And here, of course, we see them in, these would be those necklaces that the pharaohs would wear. Probably remember this guy.
I was thinking.
So the costume was a period piece and puts that element in place. You might not have known that's what those little gals on top were supposed to be there for. And of course, this would be the most famous burial mask of King Tut, as Wadjet and Nekhbet on there as well. Okay, so the presumption here is not only has Ra been taken out of play, but now Pharaoh has been blinded. The goddesses and the other gods are blind too. They can't see what's about coming. So they didn't know if an army was coming. Everything's black. We can't even talk to each other. We can't see each other. Can't even see hand in front of our face. And so this would have been a very scary prospect for these Egyptians for 3 days, not knowing whether they were really in danger or not. Well, they should have known they were in danger, but they should have known where their danger was coming from. And the fact that Pharaoh should have let them go. All right, so this does hit several other important ones here. So there's Wadjet Nekhbet there. Ra and Atum kind of go together. And of course, Horus, we've already talked about him a little bit because of he's more kind of sky, but also controls the sun. All right,
We're just wiping them all out.
pretty much. Well, there's one set left,
That's what's that left for death.
the death people, the ones that we talked about several weeks ago. Ones like Anubis and Amit, and of course Osiris is king of the dead too. So we see Pharaoh have a very serious reaction here, almost an overreaction. The Lord hardens his heart, and he would not let them go. And he basically flies into a rage here, and he makes a pronouncement that he's very much going to come to regret. So he says, "Get away from me," talking to Moses, "and take care that you never see my face again. For on the day that you see my face, you shall die." And Moses said, "As you say, I will not see your face again." Now, there's some who obviously, when we skip over to chapter 12 and the 10th plague happens, Moses and Pharaoh are going to talk again. Okay. I think it's in, verse 31 of chapter 12. At midnight, the Lord struck down all the firstborn, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sat on his throne to the firstborn of the captive who was in the dungeon. All the firstborn of the livestock. Pharaoh rose up in the night, he and all his servants, and there was a great cry in Egypt, for there's not a house where someone does not die. And he summoned Moses and Aaron by the night and said, "Up, get out from among my people, both you and the people of Israel. Go serve the Lord as you have said. Take your flocks and your herds as you have said, and be gone and bless me with it." So, very clearly we have a conversation here between Moses and Pharaoh. So there's some kind of anti-Bible types that like to point this out, that the Bible gets wrong or doesn't know what it's talking about. And I would suggest this is kind of anybody that takes that approach would be exercising malicious ignorance, meaning that they're ignoring the context of the story and using it for malicious purposes and trying to show that the Bible is not to be trusted. For one thing, this is obviously a conversation in anger. Okay? And I think we'd have to expect Moses to be responding in emotions as well. But be that as it may, the conversation we just read at 12 is nothing like any of the ones that we've been reading in the first 9 plagues, right? Before, we either meet Pharaoh down by the river, or we come into his presence. And the context of a lot of those conversation was Pharaoh gives Moses and Aaron an audience, and they then have this conversation as equals. Okay? That very clearly is not what's happening after that 10th plague. And so this comment that he makes, where he says, "Get away from me, take care that you never see my face again, for on the day that you see my face again, you shall die," becomes somewhat prophetic in the sense that the next time Moses and he meet, there is a death involved, or there's a pall of death. Whose is it? The son, the prince on his throne. And so this was very foolish to say, because Moses clearly has the power at this point. We've gone through 9 showings of what Moses can do. And remember, at the very beginning, what did God tell Moses he was going to do? You were going to become like God to Moses, or to Pharaoh. And so he's got the power to release plagues. He's got the power to call plagues back. And you say something like this. So again, your vision of yourself is that I'm at least his equal. Okay? So Pharaoh is kind of the Ra incarnated and leading the people. And that's why that vision was so important. And so I think the NIV actually gets that Moses' response a little bit better, where it says, the NIV says that Moses says, "This is the last time I will appear before you." And so that seems to be the case. Okay. Bottom line is, next time they do end up talking, Pharaoh is going to what we're going to see is the next time they meet, we see that Pharaoh tried to bargain. Moses explained why. Pharaoh throws Moses out, threatens to kill him. And the next time they meet, somebody is going to have died. And Pharaoh is going to let those people go. And there's going to be no discussion. So no types of bargaining. No, you can go, no conditions. Right? It's going to be you and everybody with you. Get out of my land. And Pharaoh has been completely beaten by this point. Okay, he's done. Now, as we know, we'll pick it up with the 10th plague. He's still gonna be hurt and prideful, and we're gonna get whatever little chariots we still have left and pursue. But the context is definitely done. So that as we go back to the start of verse 10, I am going to show these signs of mine among them, and you are going to tell in the hearing of your son and your grandson how I have dealt harshly with the Egyptians, and what signs I have done among them, that you may know that I am the Lord. Okay. And of course, later in 12, we found out that he was very clearly going after these gods and goddesses. And that was going to be important for telling your sons and grandsons as well. But the bottom line is that there's one thing left, right? Because we see in 11, we'll end here. The Lord said to Moses, "Yet one plague more I will bring upon Pharaoh and upon Egypt, and afterwards he's going to let you go." So the declaration, God's been in control this whole time. I mean, Pharaoh had his chances up until 5, and then 6, 7, 8, 9 are going to happen. And now the 10th is going to be the delivery piece. Okay? Now, this actually works out pretty well, because it's very hard to do final plague without going into the Passover and getting ready for the Exodus. So it's probably good that we'll wait and do it all together in the fall.
So when are we starting?
I'm not sure, probably after Labor Day for sure.
The significance of the 3 days of darkness. When I was growing up, on Good Friday, it would always be, everything would be shut down from 12 to 3. Is that part of that, would that be part of the significance?
Of
that
3
God
days?
putting in there? The
Um,
3 days?
I've not read that. I don't
Sure
know.
makes sense, the darkness.
3 is an important number for scripture, so.
Yeah,
Yes.
I don't think it's a random number that he's chosen. But yeah, I don't think we want to get,
But I think the
far,
darkness, I
but-
would agree with you, Frank,
but the darkness, yeah.
because remember, when the earthquake came and
Mhm.
it got dark
Yeah.
on Good Friday?
Like pitch black,
Yeah.
dark, just
Yeah.
like this, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Interesting, I never correlated the two.
mhm. I remember, as Jim was talking about Revelation, we hit a third of the sun, and we hit a third of kind of different, like knocking out different pieces. By the time we're done, we will have knocked it all out, and the only light that will be left is what? The sun, S-O-N.